great pleasure to be here. First time I've presented for the Energy Innovation Co-operative, but I've kept track of presentations I've given since starting to talk about climate and energy efficiency, and I think this is talk number 65. So over about 12 years. So yeah, it's my new passion, and wasn't the passion in that last talk great? I know this subject reasonably well, but I was really inspired by the passion and optimism shown in that presentation. So let's launch into it. And yeah, as Sharon suggested, let's keep questions to the end, because where I've done talks like this in the past, and we've had questions in the middle, it ends up, as much as I like talking about this stuff, and we could, I'd be happy to talk all day. I know you don't want to be here all afternoon, so let's launch into it. So what's electrification? It's gaining some traction and some currency at the moment, this idea about running our lives without directly burning stuff. So what's that mean? No natural gas. Natural gas is, of course, a marketing term for fossil methane. No petrol, no LPG, no wood fuel. So there's a whole raft of different topics there, but I'm mainly going to focus on the first one. Why electrify? Well, gas is bad. There's a climate imperative, and more about that in a second. Everyone knows that the grid is transitioning to renewables and that it's happening fairly quickly. To electrify is cheaper because in conjunction with solar PV it makes our energy cheaper. Electricity is more efficient than gas. And to the point about gas being problematic, I like this quote from Rachel Golden of the Sierra Club. There is no pathway to stabilising the climate without phasing gas out of our homes and buildings. This is a must-do for climate and a livable planet. So that hopefully puts a sobering perspective on this exercise. So there's a myth around gas that it's a clean, cheap fuel. The reality is that it's inefficient, it's associated with high end-to-end real-world emissions. Victoria's bounty of cheap gas out of Bass Strait is in its sort of twilight years. So there's reports just last week about the reduction in production out of Bass Strait. And what we're not getting out of Bass Strait is in Australia coming out of unconventional gas fields, a lot of it in Queensland. Many people might not be aware, but these days the gas network on the east coast of Australia is all interconnected. So there are times in Australia where gas is pumped out of the gas fields in Victoria and ends up in Queensland. Other times it's coming the other way. In winter, when we don't have enough, when we can't produce enough per day, then the difference, the shortfall is made up by gas coming out of the unconventional gas fields in Queensland. So that gas is dirtier, the price of gas is going up. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a picture of why I say that gas is dirty. The emissions footprint of gas comes from a number of places. The one that most people are aware of is the emissions from the complete combustion at the point of use. You know, that's the headline source of emissions of gas. That's what most people think about. But there's leaks and venting of methane in the prospecting, the production, the processing, the distribution on premises and in post-production. And a lot of that is overlooked and underestimated. That's a bigger problem than most people realise. I've been paying close attention to this for the last 10 or 12 years, and I don't see enough general awareness of that. It's not just about this, it's a lot about this. And to help put that in perspective, the methane that's in the atmosphere, when we talk about emissions and sort of render them in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent, Well, when we're talking about methane, the CO2 equivalent amount of emissions is the corresponding mass of methane out of the ground multiplied by the global warming potential. And so it's pretty simple. And as I see it, there are problems in the estimation of this because of what I was saying about the leakage and so on. And there's also problems on this side as well. So just about the global warming potential, without nerding out too much, Australian standards for emissions accounting apply a global warming potential of 25 when reckoning the emissions from methane. And so that's because the residence time of methane in the atmosphere is much less than carbon dioxide. Scientists don't just have one number for crediting the global warming potential of methane. They look at two different time horizons. They look at it over 100 years or 20 years. And if looked at over 100 years, it's 25 times worse than per kilo than CO2. But looked at over a shorter horizon, it's much worse. And as the science improves, these numbers are changing as well. So the number that's generally applied in emissions accounting is associated with an earlier assessment report. And I haven't updated this for the 2022 IPCC report, but the point that I wanted to make is we're using this number when we should be using this number. So there's no good reason. I've asked this question of many people over the last decade. Why are we using 100-year accounting instead of 20-year? Well, we need to apply the time frame associated with the problem at hand. We don't have 100 years to solve this, so we need to be holding the industry's feet to the fire and making them use the 20-year global warming potential number in their emissions accounting. And they don't want to do that because that would make their problem look much, much worse than it really is.
No.
So
it would make it look as bad as it is.
There's a factor of about 3.4 difference between those. And as best as I can tell, there's also around about a factor of 3 to 5 difference between the industry's reckoning of the leakage and the actual. So you take, and you saw from the previous slide that those things multiply together. So if the two factors that multiply together are each out by about a factor of 3, then the whole thing is out by about a factor of 10. So in other words, the accounting of emissions from methane is out by about an order of magnitude. So moving on, and just in case it begs the question about why we want to electrify, it might beg the question, but electricity is going up. Why would we electrify if electricity is going up? Well, the answer is we still want to electrify even though electricity is going up, and that's because it's gas prices that are largely responsible for setting the price of electricity. So a lot of people aren't aware of that. That it's the marginal price of gas that tends to set the electricity price when there's less when the supply of electricity is tight, shall we say. This is also informative. If we look at the price of energy versus the consumer price index and index it back to September '89, what jumps out is that the energy price in Australia has gone up significantly faster than inflation since about 2000, since the sort of mid-2000s. So this decade or so here, it pretty much tracked inflation, and then look at it since then. This is around about the time of privatisation. Wasn't that a great idea? And look what happened here. Anyone want to hazard a guess what happened around 2012, 2013? Put it this way, the gas export terminal in Gladstone in Queensland opened in 2014. And the futures price of gas responded before it opened. So this big jump in gas price and the corresponding jump in electricity price coincided with the gas market in Australia connecting to the global market. So before then we had an island. Our market was an island, only responded to internal supply and demand forces. Now we have a much more volatile gas price because it's subject to external global factors. And you can see in the last few years, the wholesale, this only goes up to about 2021, but you can see the gas prices continued up and the wholesale price of electricity has come down a bit. Since then, both these have jumped up again. Thanks, Vladimir Putin. Okay, let's bring this back to a household scale. What's a good goal for homes in this context of electrification? I suggest that it's to be net energy positive and all electric. What does that mean? Net energy positive means generating more than we consume. Of course, that's possible because of rooftop solar. It's now become familiar, doesn't need explanation. Net energy positive also can come about in conjunction with reducing our consumption. So it's that increase in generation plus a reduction in consumption, and the two together, we can be consuming less than we generate. When that happens, good things change. So to put that in perspective, for a home that's not net energy positive, the grid is strictly a supply system. It's a thing we get energy from, full stop. But when you're net energy positive, your perspective about the role of the grid is a different one. The grid is a sharing system, it's not just a supply system. And that sort of mind shift is a useful one because you're depending on the grid not just to give you stuff but also to take your surplus and share it with your neighbours. And in that respect, the role of the grid is fundamentally different. So the changes that we can do when we improve our homes involve improvements in comfort, a reduction in cost, increase in the value of a house, the emissions associated with operating the house going down. So in a very real sense, the changes that we can make represent an investment, not a cost. So we have to take this investment frame of mind as well. That it's money spent isn't just an immediate cost, it's a long-term view. We can compare it with money in our super or property or shares. So how do we achieve this? Basic principles: energy efficiency, renewable energy, and not burning stuff. So I wrote a book called The Energy Freedom Home, which Sharon's brought along a copy. Hopefully it's available at the library. And in that book, I divided the whole problem up into 9 sort of chunks to frame the whole generating solar and doing the other home improvements as all part of one bigger problem, one bigger activity. And looking at those things together holistically, I think, is important. So the first of the 9 steps there is lighting, and I'm now going to drill through just those 9 steps over the rest of this talk, and hopefully give you some ideas about ways to improve your house and achieve this, largely drawing on my own experience. For the last, well, I got my home off gas and made the efficiency improvements to my own house between 2006 and 2013. And since then I've been helping other people do it. So what I'm going to talk about now comes from that experience. So lighting. Obviously people are aware that we can upgrade old lights with LEDs. We can do that before waiting for them to fail. The downlights, there's some subtlety to the message here that's important. The main thing is to not just replace the bulb. It's not uncommon for people to have, very, very common, that homes will have light fittings like these. These are called MR16 fittings, and often people tend to replace the old halogen bulbs with LED bulbs. That's not the right thing to do. So the right thing to do is to, let me come back to that. This is a thermal image taken at a client's house. You can see the downlight there, and around that is a heat signature showing missing insulation. That's what it looks like on the other side. Where old lights were present, it was necessary for that insulation to stand off from the light for safety reasons. We don't want the insulation catching fire and burning the house down. And installers of insulation are very aware of that. Now that lights have become a lot more efficient, that risk is going away, but it's not completely gone. And so if one of these had an LED in it, there's nothing stopping someone coming back and putting an old-fashioned halogen in there. And so that's the reason why you don't cover these, even though there's an LED in there, because you don't want someone mistakenly putting a halogen back in there and burning the house down. So that's... The other problem is the fact that these are ventilated. This fitting, as you can see, is gimbaled, and there's a slot around the perimeter there that lets air through. That's this perimeter here. This bulb itself has a ring of slots in it that ventilates the bulb. So perversely, when this halogen was replaced with LED, you can see present there now, it made it worse in terms of ventilation. So you get that perverse problem where increasing the lighting efficiency actually makes another problem worse. So we've mentioned that lighting efficiency is a problem, that insulation effect is a problem, that ventilation is a problem, and there's the fourth problem. See this thermal image, you've got the heat signature of the light itself, but anyone want to hazard a guess what that hot blob there is?
Transformer.
It's the transformer sitting on the plaster. Exactly. So there's a fourth problem, that the old iron core transformers themselves are a heat loss, energy loss. So the moral of the story is, don't replace the bulbs. You need an entire new fitting. So this is a typical one. I call them a sealed unit, so there's no replaceable bulb. What you want is that it's IC rated. IC stands for insulation contact. As the name suggests, if it's rated IC, then it's safe and legal to cover. If you don't see that, or that picture, then don't cover it, even if it's an LED. So yeah, I'll pass that around. So this obviously has a little box that's electronics, so that would go on top of the insulation, and an electrician would have to come through and put a plug base socket in the ceiling, and then these are a plug in the socket arrangement, and if this fails, then it's just replacing a device plug in the socket, so you don't need an electrician to replace the failed units. And these aren't much more expensive than just a halogen, than an LED bulb. So that's why replacing the entire fitting is the right thing to do, not replacing the bulb. I'll pass that around. So moving on to the second step in the 9 was draft proofing. So this is something that's often done badly. So gap ceiling doors and windows is important. Exhaust fans, flues vents and chimneys, ventilated downlights. There are lots of sources of draft in a house. Ventilation is a good thing, but it needs to be controlled. So on a really hot day or a really cold day, you want to be able to close the house up tight, because it's, unless it is closed up tight, you're going to exchange a lot of air with outside, and you're not keeping the conditioned air where it should be. So Controlled ventilation is had by opening windows, not by letting air through a hole in your ceiling that shouldn't be there. So this is an example of a client's house. This is a really common thing to see in houses where this is in someone's door jamb at their front door, and you get a line of dust that collects in the door jamb. It's a telltale sign of persistent draft. So it's in this sort of spot here on the door. So go home and have a look at yours. I bet you'll find that there's signs of a draft on your front door too. And this is happening despite the fact that there's this seal here. So in other words, existing seals are often insufficient to making our doors seal properly. And that's often because doors are slightly warped. So the solution is using a good quality seal like this one that go on the frame of the door, sort of there, sort of thing, and they've got a good flexible carrier, good flexible internal seal. I'll pass that around. High penetrations, like where under a sink you might have something going through the floor, or chimneys. Lots of air can obviously exchange with outside through the chimney. Wall vents. Unless you've got a source of combustion within a room, these aren't necessary. New houses aren't built with them. Old houses were built with them because of the possibility that those spaces had sources of combustion. No source of combustion, no need for these. Through fans, the fan like the one you see on the left looks like that on the right when you're up in the ceiling, and you can see there's very little stopping air passing through that 99% of the time. This is looking at a vent boot looking downwards, and through the gap there you can see where there would be it's looking through into the subfloor cavity. So this picture was taken just by lifting up the vent, the removable vent on the floor through the floor of a ducted system. So there's lots of sources of draft that just got to go looking. This is me putting a knife in a crack between two floorboards. That's not cutting anything. That's just using the blade of the knife as a gauge to see whether the blade goes through, and therefore is a sign that air can go through as well. Gaps behind architraves, this sort of thing. Go home and if you run your finger across the top of the architrave around doors and windows, I bet you'll find that there are gaps. And this was an interesting one at a client because a little bit hard to see, but there was enough draft going through there persistently that it actually left a mark on the wall. And so where there are gaps at the top, often you'll find in houses the architrave ceiling to the wall on the sides is corked up nicely, but it's not corked up at the top because it's not visible. But it's still a pathway into the wall which is open into the ceiling, and you get the idea. Insulation. Everyone understands the role of insulation in ceilings, but it's often done badly. Thing to appreciate is that common guidelines are a minima, that when we talk about 6-star homes, that's not an exemplar of great efficiency. Ceilings need a net effective level of about R5, that's a good goal. Walls and floors try for about R2.5, but in practice I get into people's roofs many times a week, and I see this sort of thing, where there are bats that are removed for no good reason. This is a thermal image looking up at a ceiling in a winter scenario, and the blue darker bits are colder. There's a bit of missing insulation around the downlight. There's more missing around downlights. This looks like it's possibly a rafter with insulation missing along the sides of it. But the point of the image is to show that all these little holes in the insulation add up to a non-trivial fraction of the total ceiling area. And when insulation is installed in a new house, for example, builders are obliged to take into account that fact that insulation isn't 100% and apply what's called a de-rating. So they have to de-rate the effective, and this is the table they use for doing it. And just to show you an example, so this table's out of the construction code. So let's say the insulation thickness is R5, and there's 5% net uncovered ceiling. So in other words, there's about 1 in 20 of the ceiling which is uncovered. Looking at the back of plasterboard when you're up in the ceiling sort of thing. Then the net effective insulation in that case is 2.5. So this is the basis for a common rule of thumb that's used in the industry, that if 5% of the ceiling is uncovered, then the net result is a 50% reduction in performance. And that sounds quite dramatic, but it's actually an underestimate of the problem, because that's the case when you're trying to achieve 2.5 with 5% uncovered. You need to put in R5. But as you go up and you're trying to achieve higher levels, you can see how this big chunk of this table is greyed out, and that's where you're not allowed to go. So in other words, if you're trying to achieve R5, you're not allowed to exceed more than 1.5% uncovered. And to achieve R5, you're going to need R7 bats. And believe me, I go into the roofs of new houses often, and I see a lot more than 1.5% uncovered. So as a rule of thumb, most houses, even new houses, are not achieving more than about a third of the level of effective insulation that people think, because of the fact that it's not uniform and continuous out to the edges and around things like ceiling vents and downlights and other things. Windows. Windows on a per square metre basis are a weak link in the thermal envelope of a house. So it's important that they not be too big. Everyone's aware of double glazing as having 2 layers with something in the middle as a way of improving the performance of windows. You might not be aware of secondary glazing. We'll talk about that in a sec. Curtains and blinds are also an important role, and as is external shade. So this is a picture taken from a client's house a few years ago. This was a house that was only a couple of years old when I was called to inspect it. The people thought they'd built an efficient house. It wasn't performing well. It was up near Dalesford, and they asked me to come and find out, tell them why their house was shit. And anyone want to hazard a guess why that's a problem? No window coverings and too much window, just way too much window. Yeah, even though that's north facing, it's too much glass and nothing to cover it when the sun goes down. So oversizing, no window coverings. So I mentioned secondary glazing. There's more than one way to give effectiveness of double glazing, and secondary glazing is this idea that we can add another glazing layer on existing windows. And what the picture shows is just a sample of a product called EcoGlaze that I've sat in someone's window reveal just to demonstrate to them how it sits. But you can imagine that thing extending in all directions and adding another layer. So between there and the glass is an air gap. This is held in magnetically. There are different variations on this system that suit different types of window. This version of that product called EcoGlaze suits fixed windows. There's another one for sash windows, another one for awning windows. But the point is that you don't need to throw away existing windows entirely and replace them with new double glazed windows. You can get decent performance and retain the investment in your existing windows and not throw away stuff that's otherwise okay. Window coverings. So the way I look at it is double glazing or secondary glazing is necessary but not sufficient for thermal performance. So I tell people that going from having single glaze to double glaze takes windows from being terrible to just being merely bad. Okay? So it's important to realise that double glazing by itself is not a good insulator. That surprises a lot of people because they have double glazing up on a pedestal as being amazing, but in practice it's nowhere near as good as a wall. So going from single to double is necessary, but it's not enough. So we need window coverings that can hold a relatively still layer of air against the glass. So take these roller blinds, for example. These are an example of what not to do, because air that's between the glass and the blind can pass easily up behind the roller and over the top. And to the extent that air between the glass and the blind wants to move, it's going to move vertically. So it's going to be air movement that's driven by the temperature difference between inside and out. That's called natural convection, driven by temperature difference. And in a winter situation, the inside air cools in contact with the glass and sinks, and that draws in air over the top. And when you've got roller blinds like that, that movement is very, very easy, and that's what you want to stop. So that's why internal window coverings are really important, and choosing the right ones can make a huge difference. Cellular blinds are the best. So this is, I don't know whether you've seen them before, got a sample here. So this is an example of a cellular blind. This is a sample from a company called Veneta Blinds. And you get the idea that there are cells of air. When it folds up tight, air's not in there, but when it's open, this is holding a layer of air within the structure of the blind itself, plus the whole thing against the glass, there's a layer of air held between the blind and the glass. So combined effect is really good. These are from my old house. You can see edge on the cells when the blinds are down. And looking up close. I'll pass that around. Appliances and cooking. You may have redundant devices, so turn off things you don't really need. Consider efficiency when buying. Use the star ratings. Induction cooktops are much better than gas with much higher efficiency. That's my own cooktop at my new place at Cape Patterson. So this is the cooktop from my old kitchen. This is the house that upgraded, as I said, between 2007 and 2013. So I had this cooktop. It was a Bosch. It was about 10 years old when this photo was taken. I found it very scratch resistant. It worked perfectly well, and still looked great when I sold the house. About 12 years after that was put in. So highly recommend it. Heating and cooling. Obviously a lot of energy is used by heating and cooling, and it's really important. So my advice is to avoid ducted systems. Ducted systems are very, very common, but they're associated with lots of problems. I recommend that we use heat pumps as the fundamental technology for heating and cooling. So heat pumps is the technology in reverse cycle split systems, and we want to get rid of our gas heating. So this is an example of what not to do with split systems. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's split systems done wrong. Now, when I tell people that using split systems for an entire house is a good prospect, this is what they're imagining. That's not the way to do it, okay? So you can get split systems for heating a whole house without ending up with that. So the solution is a multi-split. A multi-split is an arrangement of a split system where one outside unit drives multiple inside units. And those inside units can be of different types. You've got your classic high wall mount, you have a low wall mount unit. This is called the bulkhead unit, this is called a cassette unit. So there's different ways of delivering that heat into a house, all running back to one unit on the outside. It's much more efficient than ducted because, well, there are lots of reasons, but just to cover the main points about the problems with ducting and why this is better. Ducting involves a whole of house circulation. Well, the air coming out of every outlet has to go back to a single return point. So for normal operation, you can't have doors closed. I mean, how silly is that? I mean, you've got outlets in bedrooms. When the system's on, you can't achieve proper operation if the bedroom doors are closed. Also, there's a non-trivial surface area of the ducts passing through the roof. The roof void tends to get very hot in summer, very cold in winter. So there's a lot of heat loss in that process of air going around, into the house, outside the thermal envelope, back inside the thermal envelope, and around and around. So it's throwing energy away. And there are other problems like air quality as well. So that's why I like split systems. This is from my old house. So I had it was a 3-bedroom, 2-living area, period house in Melbourne, and we replaced the ducted system with 2 multi-split installations. So in other words, there were 2 of these, this one and one along the same wall. So having a much smaller number of outside units means you can put them in places that they're less visible, and then we ended up with 7 of these on the inside. So that did the whole house. At the risk of getting a little technical, but I think you guys are up for it, this is a chart that I came up with for a report that I was involved in writing for Beyond Zero Emissions back in 2013, so 10 years ago now. But basically it does a comparison between a legacy gas ducted system and a heat pump. And in both cases we're comparing it on the basis of 10 megajoules of useful delivered heat in each case. So if we look at the ducted system on the left-hand side, to get 10 megajoules of useful delivered heat, you need 33 megajoules of gas in the burner, and we've got flue losses, duct losses, waste delivered heat, a bit of electricity for the fan. So you need all this amount of energy coming in to get this much energy out. The same heat delivered with a split system, you only need this much energy because most of the heat that's delivered is coming from the ambient environment. That's the beauty of a heat pump, is it's literally pumping heat energy out of the air. And it needs much less energy from the mains than it is able to extract from the air. So in terms of comparing the efficiency of the legacy gas ducted system to the split system, we're basically comparing the width of this on the one hand with the width of this on the other hand, and it's about a ratio of 13 to 1 in that example. So even if per megajoule gas is cheaper, this is a cheaper service to operate overall because it's using so much less energy. So moving on, hot water. People are aware of solar hot water systems like this one, and they're okay, but there's a high wintertime boost energy needed in the cooler states of Australia. So in other words, one of these type of systems working properly over the course of a year will use less energy, quite a lot less energy, but in winter it's still using a lot of energy. So you've got that big seasonality to the energy use of these. And the other problem is there are significant reliability problems. So when I've learned the hard way, I've assessed probably 700-800 houses over the last 10 years. And pretty well every time I go to a house that has rooftop solar thermal hot water, the system's faulty, and the people don't even know it. So it's really common to have gas boosted solar hot water, and you go to the house with this and you put your hand on the fitting on the tank, and the tank is dead cold. That's a telltale sign that there's no solar energy being collected at all. And people don't even realise this. And so all the energy for their hot water is coming from the gas booster, and the solar collector's on the roof wasting space when it would be better off solar panels. So heat pumps, on the other hand, are a versatile and efficient way to do it. So this is an example of what's called a split system heat pump, where the heat pump unit is this one. It looks like the outside part of a split system air conditioner, but instead of pumping heat into the house, it's pumping heat into the tank. And from then on, it's just like having a regular hot water service, hot water out of a tank. So, and comparing a working solar hot water with one of these, the energy use overall is comparable, but the seasonal variation is much less. So these are much better in winter than one of these. Lots of houses have poor pipe and valve insulation on their hot water, regardless of what the energy source is. So this is a thermal image showing the heat loss down the pipe. Okay, this is the pressure relief valve that every hot water tank has, and on it is a pressure, what's called a valve cozy, which I have on here somewhere. What happened to it? Doesn't matter. There's a connection between this product and the last film we saw. The GP in that story, Malcolm McKelvey, is actually, he owns the business that makes these. So I give these to my clients when I assess a house, and I buy them off Malcolm. So interesting story there. People that originally designed and produced these were going out of business, and there was no one going to buy the business off them, and that these were going to stop being available. So Malcolm stepped in and said, okay, I'll buy the business because it's just so important that these as a product are available. And so they don't save a huge amount of energy, but it's an easy win. For a small amount of dollars, you're reducing the heat loss out of the tank. So it's an easy thing to do.
Where do we get them?
valvecozy.com.au.
Thank you.
Actually, there it is. So I'll pass that around, you get the idea. It's a very simple principle. It just clips around the valve. So we need to monitor and control the energy used in our houses. So for example, we can know what our baseline energy is. And know how much your house consumes, how many watts of power the house might typically be using, like when everything is off. There's a residual amount of power used by smoke alarms and clocks and things on standby. And so if you've got something that monitors that energy in real time, when you go to bed and you see that, oh, actually, I'm normally using 200 watts and now it's using 500, oh, I've left something on. So minimising our standby power use is easy. Make good use of your smart meter. Get an in-home display. An in-home display is just something like what's in the picture that lets you see in real time how much power your home is consuming. A good product these days is a product called a Power Mate that clips onto your smart meter. The power distributors in Victoria all have each has a web portal that everyone can connect to and can see the smart meter data from their meter, not quite in real time, but generally up to yesterday. So if you're not already on it, I encourage you to get on it. We're in the AusNet area here, so yeah, I think it's called My Energy. So if you get onto that, it's useful. And the last of the 9 steps I'll put as solar energy, rooftop solar PV. Who here already has solar? Yeah, preaching to the converted. But even though you all understand rooftop solar well, and I don't need to tell you that it's a good thing, but hopefully there's some bits of this explanation that might help you explain it to other people. Solar's a great investment. The extent to which it's good as an investment varies with how much you can consume within your own home. My own experience shows that 5 kilowatts on the roof can make a good home net energy positive. Go for quality. Plan for a 25-year life. So in other words, think of the cost of the rooftop solar as an investment. Think of it as buying 25 years worth of electricity paid for up front. That's the best way to think about it. And with that sort of frame of mind around it, there's a rule of thumb that I've come up with that helps you estimate the lifetime cost of that rooftop solar energy over the 25 year period. So we take the specific cost of the installed system and divide by 300. When I say specific cost, I mean cost in dollars per kilowatt of capacity. And 300 is the number that, the magic number that I come up with that applies in Victoria. So let me give you an example. Imagine a household gets a 5 kilowatt system that cost them $6,000 up front. So dollars per kilowatt, that's $1,200. So there's 6,000 divided by 5. So you divide 1,200 divided by 300 and you get 4. That's the cost of the energy over 20 years. So if we assume a 20-year life with the amount of annual generation we expect to get from the panels, then every kilowatt you generate is costing you 4 cents. And that's a good way of looking at it because it helps you directly compare that cost with what you're paying from the grid and also with respect to the feed-in tariff. So when someone moans at you that I'm only getting 5 cents or 6 cents for my feed-in tariff, well, guess what? It's costing you less than that, so it's still making you money. So the state government of Victoria, at least, is committed to not letting the feed-in tariff, the regulated feed-in tariff, go below a level that captures the social cost of carbon, is the term they use. So even though the feed-in tariffs come down a lot, expect to see it not go too much lower than about 3 or 4 cents. So even in the worst case scenario where a home's exporting all of its energy, then it's still going to pay for itself over its life. So this myth that solar's not worth it because the feed-in tariff's so low is just plain wrong. So every kilowatt of purchased grid energy that you avoid is a great benefit. So let's say if you're buying at 44 cents from the grid and the solar is costing you 4, then the benefit is the grid cost minus this amount to give you the benefit. That's where the real benefit is. Some people misunderstand what their bill is telling them when they look at their bill and they see that the feed-in tariff part is such a small amount. They think that's the basis for solar working for them, and they see that as a small number, therefore they conclude that it's not working for them. But what the bill's not showing you is that avoided consumption. So the real reason why solar is great is because it avoids hopefully a large amount of consumption, but the bill doesn't capture that. And so that's the key to understanding the economics of solar. The question will obviously arise, so I'll address it now. What about batteries? So that's my own battery system. I think it's an exciting technology, but it's potentially distracting. The economics are currently poor, and my advice is perhaps consider it once you've done everything else. Yes, it can significantly reduce the remaining consumption that you have from the grid, but they're not cheap. So batteries can give a significant reduction in grid consumption, but they can also give blackout protection, and they can also give environmental benefits because of reduced impact on the grid. So whether a battery makes sense for you comes down to the question of why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you think it's going to pay for itself over an arguable 10-year life, say, then you might be disappointed. But if you're doing it because your power is unreliable, then by all means, you get that other benefit as well. So, yeah, I put my own solar in to be battery ready, and then was in the storms in 2021, mid-2021, when we were out for a couple of days, and then we decided to pull the trigger and go ahead and get the battery. So I'm happy to have a battery, and it does reduce my costs significantly. But if I was just doing it for economic reasons, I'm not guaranteed on it covering the cost of the battery over the life of the system. Okay, quickly going to run through the case study in my own house. So that was the house there, suburban Essendon. The last year prior to me making significant changes was 2006. Okay, so that's a baseline for consumption. So in 2006, from there's no solar yet. The home used 80 gigajoules of energy all up. So the red part of each of these bars represents gas energy. Each bar is a month. The blue part is electrical energy. So you can see it's quite peaky, meaning there's a lot more energy used per month in the middle of the year than the start and the end of the year. Obviously, it's in Victoria. We use a lot more energy heating and cooling, so that explains that sort of characteristic seasonal pattern. And then over the course of the next few years, you can see the energy use is coming down as a result of the sorts of initiatives that I've described earlier in the talk. And then in 2011, you can see what's happened there. See, at this point here, we disconnected from gas. So even though the electricity use has gone up in the following year, it's gone up by an amount that still constitutes a gradual reduction. Oops. And I can't show you the last. Anyway, the 2013 wasn't much different to 2012. So the point is that in this time I've done all those measures, including add solar, but these numbers are only showing the underlying consumption of the house, not, in other words, it's as if there's no solar here. So this is not showing the effect of solar. So the resultant energy consumption, all electric, is entirely offset by solar. Okay. So I've gone from 80 gigajoules gas and electricity here, 20 gigajoules of electricity here, fully offset with solar. And so that's a 75% reduction in underlying consumption of the house, and that's with 5 kilowatts of solar and a lot of other improvements. The house is much more comfortable. So some people's view about efficiency might be that, we have to forego these things to save energy. Well, there was no sacrifices made in terms of comfort to achieve this outcome. Okay, if you want to see a contemporary good example of high performance, then many of you might be aware of the Cape estate at Cape Addison. This is where I live. There's great examples of new efficient all-electric homes. The minimum there is 7.5 stars. So that's my own place. Great passive solar. And so it's currently set up, the estate is currently not open for for seeing in the houses generally, but the display home, which happens to be this home, you can see through that window there, is open many days a week as a display home. And you can just drive around the streets and see what the houses look like and get a sense of what good contemporary high-performance homes look like. And this year we opened for Sustainable House Day, and we'll probably do that again next year. So if you want to see homes up close and personal and see what high performance looks and feels like, then come along next year. As Sharon mentioned, I'm associated with the Facebook group called My Efficient Electric Home. It's a public group. As of right now, we're at 102,000 people. It's a friendly discussion with free advice. Come along and have a chat. If you need professional assessments, I do that through New Energy Thinking. And contact me at that address for an in-home consultation. A full report. Think of it as getting a map for your journey. So, as you saw from my case study, it took me about 7 years. It doesn't necessarily have to take everyone 7 years, but whichever way you cut it, it's a journey. A journey to transform your home from average to something much better. So in conclusion, transformative change is possible. It's a journey. It works. I should mention that I've kept track of the savings on the old house that I had, which I sold last year. And up from the time that I started making improvements up until I sold the house, the saved energy was about $70,000.
How much did you say?
70,000. So electrification isn't just about switching to electric. I think and encourage people to look at it as switching to electric, doing solar and efficiency all together. And when that's the case, then good things can happen. It all just makes sense. Oops. Any questions? Yeah.
A hypothetical, Richard.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a young couple, proverbial young couple, facing high cost of living. If you've got an inefficient house, struggling with a mortgage, they can't afford more than $6,000. They can't afford more than $6,000 to spend on efficiency and saving on energy and so on. Would you suggest that they put in a solar system? I can't afford any more. Or spend the money on a range of the other options that you presented before?
The low-hanging fruit is nearly always draft proofing. It's low cost. Draft proofing can be done quite inexpensively, and it has an immediate impact. So in your hypothetical 6,000, you're going to spend less than 1,000 on good quality draft proofing. And beyond that, it's hard to generalise. I'd have to see the house, but sometimes a very, very common scenario is, thanks Sharon, a very, very common scenario is the ceiling insulation is in very poor condition, that there are sufficient bats already in place, and that by very simply making good the material that's there, you can effectively double or even triple the effective performance of the ceiling insulation at zero cost, or very, very little cost, by just plugging the gaps. So it's not uncommon for homes, both new and old, to have an effective uncovered ceiling area of 10 to 15%, especially around the edges, above the perimeter walls, because often insulation isn't pushed out right towards and over the top of the top plate of the walls. So if a house has 15% net uncovered and they're trying to achieve R5, then the effective is only maybe R2. So you get 2.5 times the performance just by plugging the gaps and adding a little bit more maybe. And that, if you're prepared and comfortable getting into a ceiling and doing a bit of work, then you can achieve great things with not a lot of cost.
And sorry, can I just mention here, and we've got copies of brochures on the table, the Miley libraries across 4 councils are now loaning out home water and energy efficiency kits and portable induction kits. And these home energy and water efficiency kits include 2 of the devices that you will have seen in Richard's slides. They include a thermal imaging camera, and they include the Power Mate device that you can plug into individual appliances, and you can actually assess how much power they're drawing. So they're really useful. They're incredibly popular. They were launched at three of the local libraries, and we had about 20 people turn up to each of the events. So there's already a waiting list apparently, but they're available, so you can actually use the thermal imaging camera and check the state of your insulation in your roofs.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. And I brought my thermal imaging camera with me, so
You can play here.
I can show people what they look like and. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question, that you can achieve quite significant improvements on that low-hanging fruit at low cost. Yeah.
We're well progressed on this journey,
Great.
And thinking whether or not about batteries with security reasons.
Yeah.
Now have an electric vehicle of the last few days, but I wanted to ask your thoughts on going further to domestic wind turbines and whether that's worth looking at in an environment where we always have wind blowing to top up solar, or whether we should just rely on the big turbines and accept electricity from the grid.
Yeah, good question. Short answer, small-scale wind doesn't work. So many people have tried it, and because it's been tried so much over such a long period of time, and you don't see it, it tells you all you need to know about how well it works. Okay, it's I could relate a couple of examples. There used to be, there's a company called the Environment Shop. They used to be up on High Street in Northcote. And I remember driving past one windy day about 10 or 15 years ago. They used to sell domestic wind turbines. And they had 3 of them up on the roof. And the wind was coming from a certain direction that meant that the air over the roof of that building was turbulent. And wind turbines, instead of facing into the wind and spinning, they were just doing this on their axis and not doing anything useful. So it just brought home to me that even when it's windy, it's not a guarantee that you can generate any useful amount of energy from wind. You've really got to get up so high above the structure and surrounding trees to get clear air that it's just not worth it for people. Yeah. So sorry.
Another point on that is that you don't dare attach it to your house.
Yeah, the vibrations.
Yeah, it drives it nuts.
Yeah, so if you're on...
You have to build your own tower,
Yeah.
which of course puts up the cost.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, so if you live on French Island and you're on 5 acres, yeah, stick up a mast, with guy wires down and get it up well above the height of the trees. That would be a place where they don't have a grid there. That's where you do it. But no, if there's a grid, don't bother. Yeah. Ed.
On our little journey of trying to make the place more livable, we did underfloor insulation, and that was probably one of the most dramatic changes in our house.
Yeah.
It's on stumps, it's an
Yeah.
envelope, lots of wind blowing underneath, and it changed the temperature used to go up and down like that, and then smoothed it right out.
Yeah. So the question is about underfloor insulation. Yeah, the way I respond to that observation is by saying often it's not so much one bit being particularly important, but the fact that it's often the last big improvement made. So the analogy that I often use about improving a home's thermal envelope is that each significant pathway for uncontrolled heat flow is like a hole in a leaky bucket. And as you're improving the house, you're closing it for different holes. And while there's still things undealt with, it's still a leaky bucket. And it's when you close off that last significant pathway for uncontrolled heat flow, it's like closing off that last hole in the bucket, then it becomes a well-performing thermal structure. So in my case, the last significant pathway for uncontrolled heat flow in the old house was the walls, which we dealt with retrofit wall insulation in about 2011. And that was done in April. In the following winter, one morning my daughter came to me and said, "Hey Dad, I don't have to get dressed under the doona anymore." So I knew I'd made it. I knew that I'd achieved what I'd wanted. That the lesson to me was that it's that last big thing, whatever that is, that makes the home complete in terms of its thermal envelope performance, that will feel like it's the most important thing, but it's the fact that it's plugging the last hole that's the most important thing. Yeah.
I'd just like to concur with the last person who spoke regarding underfloor.
Yeah.
The things I'll say about it, and this is also in line with an earlier question, is if you've got a house up on 400 to 600 mil stumps,
Yeah.
and you've got air gushing under it,
Yeah.
you're just asking for trouble. The great thing, I did exactly the same. I put rock wool in, which is not as expensive,
Yeah.
and it took me 2 days lying on my back to do it, but it's accessible, it's not very dear, and it improved the internal temperature during winter by 4 degrees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I totally
I
get that.
can really vouch for it. Climbing up into the ceiling, as we all know, I've got a very low pitch roof, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's incredibly hot up there, and then you come out all itchy, you're covered in bugs and so on and so forth. There's a lot to be said for the underfloor, and I do agree it is part of the whole picture,
Yeah.
but it's one of the easier and cheaper things you can do.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't think about it.
Yeah. Yes. I've been under many houses and done that job. Yes, it's an important thing to do, and yes, you're right. It's often overlooked. So yeah.
How inefficient are gas hot water systems, the hot water underground? So
How-
I don't have a storage tank.
Yeah. The question is, how inefficient are gas instant hot water services? Is it?
Yep.
Yeah. They're quite inefficient at achieving hot water, but they, on the plus side, you avoid the storage losses. So you're not holding a whole tank of water hot 24/7. So it swings and roundabouts. So I mean, if you look at a hot water gas instant hot water service through a thermal camera when it's operating, you'll see this big plume of heat escaping from it. That's a sign of inefficiency. So yes, overall, it's very worthwhile switching away from that. But if you're there are cases where it's not too bad. Like a single-person household with low hot water use, for example, the total energy use for hot water is going to be quite small. So it'll depend on the situation. Yeah.
Richard, I'll be interested in your thoughts on electric elements within a concrete floor.
In-floor heating is about the worst way to heat a house. presume you mean in a slab construction. Slabs are thermally coupled to the ground. If you want in-slab heating, you really have to decouple a slab from the ground thermally. So if you've got, and this wasn't done commonly until quite recently. And even if you do that, it's still a big source of heat loss. They respond very slowly. As a system, it only does heating, not cooling. It's not taking advantage of heat pump technology. And there's a lot of heat loss from the edges of the slab. And in Australia, we tend not to insulate the edges of slabs, which is a whole separate question. But yeah, so I'm not a fan of in-slab heating at all. It's not an efficient way to heat. Insulate the slab and heat internally with a heat pump is my advice. Peter.
Question from jogs my memory on something, and that is that ground source heat pumps tend to be rather more efficient than air source heat pumps overall, but they can't be retrofitted. If you're doing a new construction, is it worth considering a ground source heat pump?
So is it worth considering a ground source heat pump? I think not. And for people who aren't aware, a ground source heat pump is understood by seeing that a regular split system is an air source heat pump, meaning the source of the heat energy is the air. A ground source heat pump involves pipes drilled into the ground and a fluid passing through those pipes to extract the heat energy out of the ground instead of out of the air. So there's a trade-off between the capital cost and the efficiency. And it's a very small market, very specialised, and split air source heat pumps are a mature, high volume market, with a lot of competition in the market. So there's a lot of innovation there. So I don't think the marginal extra efficiency is worth the very, very high capital cost in our climate. In a very severe climate like Northern America, Canada, it may be worth it because you've got a stable ground temperature all year round. Yeah.
I'm heading towards the end of the glory days of the 66 feet of tariff.
Yeah.
And I'll be looking at getting an EV probably over 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be looking at bigger energy bills, and when that EV comes along, I'll need a lot more solar.
Yeah.
So how much would a minimum sort of on roof for running an EV off your own tower?
Okay, so the question is how much extra solar for an EV? It's a hard question to answer, but the short answer is as much as you can, and don't feel like you need to avoid the south side. So it's a common. When we first started putting in solar, the cost was so high, we focused exclusively on north, and now implicitly the way we valued solar was on the maximising the yield. How much yield per kilowatt of capacity was the key figure of performance. These days, since I first put solar in 2007, it's come down in price about a factor of 10. So we don't have to be so concerned about other directions, and so these days it's much more common to see east and west facing panels as well, and I think we're going to see that go further, and we'll see more houses using the south side as well. So we'll see how. That's a long way of saying use all the roof and whatever you can.
Something unusual, basically said in Oxford with their ideal orientation, they get about the same power we get in Australia or the south.
Yeah, yeah. So south-facing panels in Europe.
So it worked pretty well.
Optimally facing panels in Europe work as well as south-facing panels in Australia. And yeah, that's true. I've recently done some numbers on it. I've recently done some analysis on that, and a good way to think about it is that if you look at summer versus winter as one variable, and cloudy versus sunny as the other variable, It gives you a 2x2 matrix. And 3 out of those 4 cases, south-facing solar works as well. So when it's cloudy, summer or winter, south-facing panel is as good as a north-facing panel. In summer, a south-facing panel and a north-facing panel are almost as good as one another. So it's just that winter time when it's sunny, does south-facing suffer a significant penalty relative to north-facing, the same capacity on north. Yeah. So,
Yes, sorry, I was going to give a specific example. I've got 6.6 kilowatts on my roof, all electric home, an EV I'm still exporting to the grid. So the efficiency gains you get through the electric home and all of the appliances that Richard has talked to us about mean that your overall energy use can come down. So I'm running an EV off a 6.6 kilowatt, which is now an average size solar system. A lot of the larger ones are 10 plus.
So
and
you're getting a
upwards.
benefit basically out of your own generation rather than putting it back in the grid?
Yeah.
Because you can't use outside of the 10 AM to 4 PM period, so at least you get a good value out of it.
before I come to you, sir, I'm going to pass this around in a sec, just so you can see what a thermal imaging camera does. Before I pass it around, to show you this, put my hand on the wall. You can see.
So that's the best way to find leaks?
Yeah, it depends upon. It's most useful in situations where there's a big temperature difference between inside and outside. So spring and autumn, it's not as good as summer or winter, but it's very useful for visualising problems, both for me finding things and for visualising for a client what's going on. Yeah, you had a question.
When do you think Australia will allow EV vehicles to be used as batteries on a solar system? Because at the moment they're not.
It's not that they're prohibited, it's just that the technology isn't widespread. There's a couple of big problems. One is that the plug interfaces on cars don't support bidirectional charging. The Nissan Leaf has an adapter on it called a Chatamo adapter. That's the Japanese style fast charging adapter. That adapter does support bidirectional charging, but it's now got legacy status. In other words, the Leaf, for better or worse, has an adapter on it that's it's gone the way of the Dodo in terms of it's a legacy, and every new car, except those few coming out of Japan, don't have that adapter on it. So, a long way of saying that until we get widespread availability of the new dominant standard called CCS with bidirectional charging, that we're not going to see vehicle to grid at any scale in Australia. So, in other words, it's going to be restricted to a very, very small number of pilot cases for so long as we're using Chatamo as the plug standard for charging. Yeah.
I understand that most vehicles have got the capability of doing it, but it has to be turned on by the manufacturer.
No, that's not true.
I understand that
Yeah.
but it's set up ready to go.
No. The plug standard, the DC charging standard on most EVs these days is called CCS. It stands for the combo charging system. And the hardware of that, as deployed on cars available today, does not support it. It's just not in the hardware. I've heard that the new Cupra born out of the Volkswagen stable might be one of the first that has some hardware support internally for bidirectional charging in CCS, but no, until CCS has widespread bidirectional rollout, which is probably not going to be till 2025 sort of time frame. So yeah, I think vehicle to grid is currently overhyped. That the energy going two ways is going to be a good thing when it happens, but that we don't need vehicle to grid for cars to play a big role, a positive role in balancing the grid.
If you're charging your car when the sun's shining and you're sending it to the grid at night, when do you drive the car?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Point made. The point that I make around vehicle to grid is that we don't need to be able to send energy from the car outwards for the cars to play an important role. The technology already in cars today allows the external control and regulation of the charge rate, so that you plug in 100 cars and you hand control over how and when they charge to a third party, and you've got a very large and valuable flexible load on the grid that can be monetised and help stabilise the grid. So you don't need two-way for charging to be very valuable. Yeah.
Can I just look to the future a little bit here? We discussed batteries earlier.
Yeah.
When I set up my off-grid very micro solar system 20 years ago, I was paying whatever it was, $10 a watt or more for my PVs. We're now seeing a similar trajectory in battery storage in terms of cost per kilowatt.
Yes.
Coming down.
Yes.
I just wanted to get an sense from you what that trajectory is like over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. I also wanted to know whether you have had any exposure to capacitive storage systems and whether they've got any future at all.
Okay, two-part question. The first part, how fast is solar? How fast are batteries getting cheaper? And how cheap do they need to get before there's widespread use? We're not too far away if you look at it on a log scale anyway. So we only need another halving, I think. So we're in the range of $1,000 to $1,500 per kilowatt of installed, per kilowatt hour of installed capacity. I think when we get down to about 700, which is only a few years away, then it's going to become, that's when it'll start to be economic for most people. Second part of your question, capacitive energy storage. I'm not seeing a lot of indications that capacitors are going to be an important part. I think chemical batteries have a lot of, they're already very mature, and there's a lot of industry learning still to go in chemical batteries that they will be the main game for some time to come, in my opinion. And for people that aren't aware, capacitors store their energy in an electric field, and chemical batteries store their energy in chemistry within the battery. So that's the main difference. Yeah. So.
I guess the attraction of capacitive storage is you're not dealing with as much of a problem in terms of all of those nasty chemicals and processes involved with batteries in terms of life and so on. Is there a particular reason why, they've been around a little while, is there any particular reason why the uptake is not good? Are they not reliable or too expensive?
Limited storage.
Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps let's take that offline.
Yeah.
I think we're close to time. I think, yeah, it's right on board.
Okay. Thank you to Richard.